My name is Jessica Crowley. I'm an enterprise agile coach and an agile trainer. And I have journeyed through an agile transformation organically in the railroad industry for over 5 years. And I took the things that I learned in the private sector and actually started working with Denise in the government sector to apply the agile approaches and best practices to some of the rigors of program management and the requirements of the government sector. There's a lot more bureaucracy and logistics associated with these large Department of Defense contracts. And then from there, I've also branched out into Agile and nonprofits. So I own a company called Epically Agile, and I do Agile coaching, training, and consulting. All right.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Denise Jarvie. I'm so excited to be here. Like Jessica, I'm an enterprise agile coach and an agile trainer. And as she mentioned, I have a lot of experience in the Department of Defense. So I primarily focus on agile in government, which is very exciting and also sometimes difficult for the reasons that she mentioned, the bureaucracy and some of the compliance. But it's very exciting, and I'm happy to bring to the government sector many of the practices that I've learned on the commercial side. And I'm excited to talk to you today about product road mapping and Agile.
Okay, so on the agenda today, in the next hour, we're going to talk about what a product roadmap is. We're going to talk about how you can design a product roadmap for your company and for your products. And we'll also talk about establishing the why with the product vision and the strategy. So communicating that to your stakeholders, to your customers, and to your own team. Why is a product roadmap important? And then we're going to have a highly interactive Q&A session with application type of questions at the very end of our presentation. So I want to take a moment and have Anna introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Anna Baker, and today I will be the producer of this webinar. I will be in chat at all times, so if you have any questions that are technical about Zoom webinar, or if you have any questions for our presenters, I will be able to ask them while the webinar is going on.
Thank you, Anna. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so what is a product roadmap? As a webinar attendee, I want to understand what a product roadmap is so I can create a roadmap that describes how I intend to achieve my product vision.
So let's talk about the history of product roadmaps just a little bit. First of all, they've been around for a very long time. Roadmaps have existed since back in the 1800s. You notice that I have a picture here of someone on a bicycle. And that's because back in like the 1890s, a lot of people used bicycles to navigate the city. And so they started to develop roadmaps to help them navigate New York City specifically. And that actually evolved. People still use roadmaps over, the last hundreds of years. So if you're familiar with AAA, I know I am. My parents had a membership to AAA, and when I first got my license, my parents gave me a triptych to help me navigate and to figure out where to go and how to get to point B. So I use the triptych, which is a roadmap, and we still use something similar today. A lot of people use navigation on their phones, or they might use Waze to help navigate the city, and it's evolved to even include things like traffic, etc. So roadmaps have been around for a very long time. Then companies like Motorola started to take that idea of a roadmap and apply it to their businesses. So Motorola started to understand that a roadmap is a great way to take you from point A to point B. And they started to use this concept in their company to provide a product roadmap for the technology that they were developing. And you're very familiar, I'm sure, with companies like Microsoft, Google, Oracle. So these are companies that today use that same concept. It's just been evolved, and now is the modern term, really, the product roadmap that we want to discuss with you today.
I think the interesting thing about roadmaps are when you're using them, you have an idea, a vision for where you're trying to go, and the path of how you're going to get there. There may be a lot of different avenues you can take, a lot of different turns. And so, what these roadmaps are capturing is that high level strategy. It's the strategy for the goals that you have in mind as a company. And specifically, we're tying them not just to the goal enterprise level strategic plan, but we're also tying it to these products and how those products are going to provide value to the customers. And I think that's why we're seeing the Fortune 500 companies and a lot of the Agile pioneers using this technique and this tool because of the power of tying everyone in a unified direction towards developing these product lines. So it's really interesting because my first idea of what a product roadmap is was this kind of locked down plan for how we're going to achieve our customer milestones. And what I've really started to understand is it's a journey that the product owner takes and often repeats over and over of unifying the things that you're going to do in the near future, the things you're going to do in the next 6 months, and the things that you're going to do later on. And it's a living activity. It's a process that combines the knowledge that the product owner has with the insight from the customers and the stakeholders, and really lays it out so that that strategy is represented in some type of picture or diagram.
Absolutely. I think that it's really become a communication tool. I
Absolutely.
think the roadmap is a great tool for not just the product owner, but everybody on the team, as well as the customers and the stakeholders, to start to talk about what is this unified vision and where are we going with our product. And it actually allows you to answer a lot of questions and have those really deep dialogue and discussion with everybody on the project or the team.
So zooming into the things that go into a product roadmap session. So you have to have a vision, right? Just like if you were going to select a destination for your GPS to populate your ideal routes, you have to have some type of way, this is where I want to end. And then the objectives are going to give you the many paths that you can take or should take to get to that destination. The time frames are really, are you willing to take a 6-hour road trip, or do you want to see all of the wonderful possibilities of a scenic route in an 8-hour road trip? And you're looking at trying to go from that high level destination down to the many experiments and paths that you could take to get to that destination, and prioritize those things into value. What is valuable to the customer? And that's what this roadmap is. The roadmap is really a 3 simple things: what we can do now,
Right.
to provide value to our customer, what we should do next to provide value to our customer, and finally, what we've determined we will do later to provide value to our customer.
And you won't see a lot of detailed tasks in this. It's more of a higher level, a broad vision. It definitely says what we're going to do now, next, and later, but it's not so detailed that it prohibits the team from being creative or innovative. But it still is that guide or that vision.
And when we're looking at the release plan, so a release plan is generally derived from this activity. So we're taking the strategy and then we're actually coming up with the mile by mile guidance that you might get from your GPS machine. So we're thinking of that in terms of orienting ourselves with where we're at and how we're going to provide that value to the customer. So hopefully that eased you into a mental map of kind of what we will discuss in the next 40 minutes. So looking at the process. How do we go from a company vision? Maybe you have 2020 or 2021 strategic goals. How do we go from that vision to our product lines and our products, to clear objectives that unify our teams? Usually there's many teams supporting these products that you're developing.
Right.
How do we take that scope and break it out in a way that they're driving towards the same strategies? And how do we also encourage agility in the form of experimentation and having these hypotheses that I think we're going to get value from X experiment? Will we get that value, and can we test that out? So this diagram is really showing the fact that we want to start separating out our roadmap from our release plan. And so you can really look at the pink dotted line here as your strategy and your release plan as your execution pieces of it. If we can separate the two of them, then we have this tool that we can keep revisiting as our strategy changes, because of course we're going to use the empiricism and the data that we have to evolve that strategy over time, especially as our product evolves and gets near the end of life. And the release plan is then something that we can execute on.
I think so. That's right. I think another interesting thing about this diagram is that although we're breaking this down from the company vision to the product, we're using terms like objective, theme, feature, and those might not be terms that you're used to. It's okay if they're called something different. This is just one example of the way that the roadmap and the release plan could be broken out. But the idea is that we have that big, higher level, company strategic level vision, and we break that vision down into something that supports our different product lines but still supports and enables that company vision. And then we break down the scope into different buckets. You could call them objective, theme, or feature.
Absolutely. So when we're talking about near-term items, these are things that are going to be maybe less flexible. Like if we started to draw out what are we responsible in the next few weeks, like what are the things that we absolutely need to do towards designing, developing, producing, and testing our product. These are things that are specific to scope. You can tie them to scope. They're more granular. And then as we go out, we want to be agile because we understand that any plan is never ever going to be perfectly executed. So we want to make sure that we only have a handful of things that are really broken down into detail.
Absolutely.
And that the further out in time you go, the more broad those items are. So we want to think in terms of NNL, next, now, and later. The next things, those are more broad. So why think about things that you'll need more flexibility on. In the next 6 months, do you really know exactly how the development of your product is going to go? No, as you execute your tests and as you compare them against your hypothesis, you're going to take different avenues to getting to that destination, and you're going to need more flexibility for that. So in terms of strategy, those will be more broad. And finally, the high level, really broad items are those later items. We know we're going to need to do this for this product line, but we'll do it in the next anywhere from 6 months, could be years.
Yeah, and I think that the empiricism that you mentioned earlier really plays into this particular topic. So we're making the best decisions that we can with the information we have now, so we can be more granular about the scope that we know we're doing in the next couple of weeks because we have more information. The things that are in the future, we don't know yet. We don't have as much information to make those decisions about exactly what are the steps that we need to take to fulfill that vision for our product. And so that's why there's a wider area of focus or bigger buckets of scope out in the next and later phases.
So let's lay this out so you have an idea of how the 3 different levels relate to each other. So you're going to have your corporate level initiatives, 2020, 2021, we want to complete X initiative. And those are usually already tied to some idea of a time span. Like in the next 6 months, we want to have a release for X product line. So this is an activity where you work with your stakeholders and your leadership team to develop what we call an initiative roadmap, which ties out when we want to see some of these releases happening at the product level. And these are usually large things, like it could be a project. And then once you have that mapped out in time phase, you're taking each of those projects or initiatives and you're saying, okay, for that initiative, what products are near term, what's further out, and what is a long-term initiative. And you break those out and time phase them like that so that you can get ready for a more deeper dive, which we call release road mapping, or you may have heard this referred to as release planning. Yes. So you really need all 3 of these things to happen to have a robust plan and to really get a good sense of how your product backlog can be properly executed. So this right here is all of the strategy that goes into creating an excellent product backlog. Any questions on that?
Or any questions so far?
All right. Okay, so we're going to deep dive into what those 3 levels look like. So your initiative roadmap is going to be the high level milestones that your company wants to achieve. Let's say they want to improve consumer experiences in Q1. They want to own the mobile channel in Q2. They want a partnership with another company or improve their conversion rate or have bug-free products. It's going to look different depending on the environment and the context of your industry and the position of your company in that context.
Absolutely. And even in government, I mean, for me, I mentioned I'm government sector for the most part. And a lot of times at this level, at this higher level initiative roadmap, that's something that you're partnering with your government counterparts to determine. So that way you have that higher level picture. You understand what are the milestones that the government is expecting you to deliver at this high, annual level. And then you can incorporate that into your initiative roadmap.
The product roadmap takes those ideas and actually starts to think about how is the company going to achieve those higher level initiatives. So this is where, like, for example, improving consumer experiences. Let's say that's a project for your company. Well, when we start breaking that out, it might be a new app form, API integration, portals. And as you overlay that scope and start to break that down, now you can start to look at those things and say, okay, what needs to happen now? What can happen in a later term, a later release?
And you can start to make priority calls. You can start to really see how much capacity do we have. And once you've got this spread across your product roadmap, you can start to make some decisions based on value. And it's a very helpful tool.
So then the release roadmap takes the information from the product roadmap and breaks it out even more into when you can expect each of those features to be released. So release one then takes it down into the detail that the teams can pull these pieces of scope. They're small, they're things that they can work within their iterations or sprints, and they're ready to be pulled by the teams. They have a clear acceptance criteria and definition of done associated with them. If you've never heard of what that means, it's basically like, what does it mean to be done? What are the requirements we're going to be meeting by doing this? What are the quality standards that we have internally that we're going to be doing for these pieces of work?
That's why we always say it's a communication tool, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
If you've got a good product owner that's laid out the release plan and they have a lot of acceptance criteria and definition that really describes the scope, then you have so many less questions from the team. And people can actually work on this, and there's not as many meetings required because they can just look at each of the features and they know what it takes to get done.
Yes. So we finished the first section, which was really to help you understand what is a roadmap, where did it come from, what are the pieces of a roadmap, why is it important? And now we're going to talk about how do you design a roadmap. So what is the steps that you need to take to design a roadmap? As a webinar attendee, I want to learn best practices for new Agile team launches so I can set my team up for success from the beginning.
So product roadmap. So first of all, there are some things that we want you to do. If you're thinking about a product roadmap, then you should be thinking about how does that relate to the company vision. So we showed you the different levels of vision, and when you're developing one for your specific product, you should tie it to the company vision, and you should focus on what value are you going to deliver when you develop this particular product. How are you going to contribute to that company vision? And we talked about outcomes, committing to outcomes. The other thing is you really want to create excitement. This product vision and this product roadmap should be engaging, exciting. You want to draw your stakeholders and your customers in, and you want to get them excited about the product that you're going to deliver. And you can do that through this great communication tool called the product roadmap. And of course, it helps align everybody to goals, starting at the company level, but all the way down to the team level. It keeps everybody headed in that same direction, just like with Waze or the maps that we talked about at the beginning.
What it shouldn't do is it shouldn't make promises that your team can't deliver. So we're not looking to tie the product roadmap to a set delivery schedule. The purpose is just to start to spread the scope into those buckets of what we can do now, what we can do in the near term, and what we'll do in the long term. And then the release plan is what ties that to the milestones. We want to also be careful about starting the design and the hypothesis and the experimentation and estimation in the product road mapping phase, because the desired outcome is to have a strategy, not to start executing or to have an extremely detailed plan.
Right. How many times have you had an extremely detailed plan that somebody
Too
else
many.
created and told the customer, hey, here's the plan, we're going to deliver on X date, and then it doesn't happen? So we are not trying to do that. We're trying to have that high level product vision, have that communication tool with our customer. We're not trying to make promises that we can't deliver, which I have seen many times with a typical detailed schedule and plan.
So we want to start to separate our strategy from the actual execution. And the best way to do that is to keep these things in mind. So for the product roadmap, we want to ask these key questions. What strategies and initiatives are going to actually make an impact for the business?
Mm-hmm.
And what's going to create value for the customer? So in this phase, you're defining the problems. It's like, what problems and needs do my
Right,
customers
right.
have? You're looking at requirements, you're looking at the scope, you're validating by having the customers and the stakeholders present and interacting with them. You're getting buy-in, you're eliminating some of the misconceptions that you may have had, and you're coming up with potential solutions and product ideas. That's all about the strategic piece of it.
Right. And then when we talk about the release plan, that's where we're really talking about how are we going to do this? And we're talking about execution. So now that we know where we're going, how are we actually going to get there? So do we have any obstacles? Are there any impediments that we can get rid of so that we can get to that end state better and more quickly? How are the development teams actually going to plan this out in sprints? And this is where we're starting to really do some of that coordination that is necessary during execution, like which resources are we going to have develop this particular scope, and doing some of that capacity planning and thinking about budget and cost, and also setting up that timeline. So thinking about the milestones and when are things actually supposed to be released to a customer.
So the great news for you is that roadmaps can meet you where you are. So if you don't have a sophisticated road mapping tool, if you just have maybe an agile tool you're already using, like a Kanban board, if you have a PowerPoint slide deck, if you are using Microsoft Excel, and if you're using some robust high definition product road mapping
Mhm.
tool, a product roadmap is not about exactly looking a perfect way. It's really just about having the strategic information available to have that conversation that we were talking about. So it's
Mhm.
okay. You can use any tool that you have. In fact, Denise and I have used sticky notes.
We have. We've used many different tools, and we've been successful in a lot of different ways. Some that are very low tech, like she said, the sticky notes, and then others that are much higher tech, like Miro and Mural and some of the other road mapping tools that are available today.
So we wanted to give you an idea in case you've never seen examples of what a roadmap can look like. Here's a tool called Trello. That's a collaboration tool. It's very similar to a lot of the other collaboration tools that are out there in terms of a Kanban board and being able to visualize the flow of work. So an example of what a product roadmap could look like is there's some product areas available, and then there's the now and the midterm and then late term activities that you'd be doing. So that's one example of it. And another example of it could be the platforms that are available out there for you for road mapping that have those three different phases: near term, midterm,
Mm-hmm.
and long term. Here's another example of the variety of many types of roadmaps that are available to you. They can be really sophisticated and even maybe time phased into those three buckets. So I would encourage you to go as simple as you possibly can for the first few roadmaps that you develop, and then decide what type of tool you'd like to use. Because you may find that it's actually quite different than you thought it was going to be, and whatever that minimum tool is, go for it.
Yeah,
That's the
however
one
you
you should
can
use.
communicate the vision, make this highly visible, collaborate with your team. I think that that's you choose the right tool for you.
Absolutely. So, what you should definitely take to heart is that this is a living activity. The strategic plan is something you revisit. And the reason for that is because your product has a natural life cycle. So in the introduction phase, you're doing a lot of brainstorming. You're thinking of how you're going to meet the needs of the customer and the market for that type of product. So your product roadmap is actually going to look quite different. It's going to be very generalized and not fully robust and developed because you don't yet know what you're
Sure.
eventually going to know.
Mhm.
In the growth phase, you want to revisit that as well, because as that demand is picking up, as your maybe product line marketers or marketers are in the sales environment and talking about your products, there's going to be a lot of different types of things that they're asking for your development teams to take into consideration.
I think so. The key is that you don't just build a roadmap once and then leave it. It's definitely a living document. It's something that you revisit. And as you have more information and as your product evolves, you're updating it. And again, you're using that as a tool to communicate to your customers, your stakeholders, and your team.
Right. So here's the three steps that in general we see people repeating across the industries. And that's usually that they start by understanding their business objective. Where does their
Mhm.
business fit into the rest of the market? How does their product fit into the business? And then how
Mhm.
do their teams that are executing that work fit into the product strategy and the business strategy? And so there's a lot of different ways these three levels get architected
Sure.
depending on the frameworks you're using, depending on your overall strategy and position, and the amount of tools available to you. But the important thing is you start a conversation about what is the vision for your company,
Mhm.
and then you start a conversation about what is the vision for your product, how are you going to measure success, and then what is the vision for these teams, and how
Yeah.
are you going to measure their success.
I agree. I think there's a couple of things that you said that really stuck out to me. One was about how are we going to measure success? And so you notice that we're starting to talk about KPIs and yeah, how are we going to know if we got there or not? How are we going to, what metrics are we going to put in place or what KPIs are we going to put in place to make sure that we are actually on the right track using a data, some data analysis. The other thing is that this is to help us get alignment across our organization. And that's so key. So a lot of places that I've been and organizations I've worked with in the past, even though they're thriving and successful businesses, they actually are not aligned. And it's amazing how much more profitable and how much better their organization could be if they had that alignment. And this is one way that you can do that using a product roadmap.
So step number one, create a product vision. So we created a fictitious product, the Nano Pro. So for the busy executive who needs a laptop that's lightweight, powerful, and cutting edge, the Nano Pro is a laptop that can withstand the demands of a road warrior. Unlike the MacBook Pro, our laptop combines staggering power, sleek style, graphics that dazzle, and incredible memory and storage. So this vision is not created in a silo. This vision is created with your product owner or maybe product management team,
Mm-hmm.
product ownership team, and your customers and your stakeholder.
Right? Typically, when we help organizations come up with their product vision, we invite a lot of people to this initial meeting. Of course, we're having people like the product owner developing some draft language for the product vision, but then we get other people's buy-in. We make sure that we actually invite customers if we can, and if not, definitely internal stakeholders to try to make sure that this is a compelling vision, that it really captures what it is that we're trying to build that will delight our customers. So this is a template that we often use to help organizations and product owners actually come up with the vision. So for your target customer who needs something, some type of opportunity, the product name, like our laptop, is some type of product category, and what's the key reason or benefit to buy it? And then you want to differentiate yourself. So unlike your competitors, our product does something. How are you different? So this is something that we've used at many different organizations in different industries, and it just helps align the product owners or the people who are developing the vision and makes it easier for them to write.
The second step is to understand who your customer or your end user is.
Mhm.
And in this case, because we have a laptop company, we actually identified three main personas. The first one is Mr. John Tila. He's 43 years old. He's a busy executive. He does a lot of traveling between his sites and headquarters. And his focus is really on building relationships, building his network. And he really needs a laptop with business grade capabilities. So it needs to have that long battery life. He's running from meetings to flights. And it also needs to be easy to use, whether he's in his office or he's on an airplane. He also needs to be able to reliably present when he needs to present and wants to be able to switch between writing on a tablet and using a laptop. So that's Mr. John Tila. And this is the process that you would go about creating this persona. It's pulling those stakeholders and those that understand the customer in the room and walking them through creating these key fake personas that embody what it is that that customer is actually doing and a little bit about their demographics to make it relatable and personal.
Yeah, I agree, and it's such an important thing. People skip this step. A lot of organizations think that they know their customer. They think that they have enough of a relationship or an understanding, but really developing these personas helps everybody on the team to remember the user and the customer that they actually are trying to develop a product for. So we've created a couple of other personas, which is typical. Normally, there's not just one customer. Usually, we see at least a couple of other secondary personas for. So for example, with this laptop, we thought that a student and also a gamer would be other personas or other customers, users that we might need to think about as we're developing the product. So a student versus an executive might have very different ideas about what is valuable to them. So they might need something that's more durable, definitely more affordable than our executive. And
Ramen noodles.
Yeah, exactly. And also it's pre-configured. So the laptop already comes packaged with software. It's not as customizable, making it more affordable. And then the gamer, they're looking for the high quality graphics, the great sound system, maybe speed or customizable applications and things that they can be creative with on their particular laptops. So again, the persona is a very important step of developing a product roadmap. And typically there's not just one, but could be secondary or even 3 or 4 different types of personas that the team should think about when they're creating their vision and their roadmap.
Typically the one that is the primary persona is maybe the one you're getting the most revenue from,
Right.
the one that you're providing the most value to. So in this case, while we're making a laptop that can be sold to multiple demographics, perhaps the laptop we're producing will be most profitable for our business executives. Okay, so if you have the releases that you have in mind, or near term, midterm, and then long term, what we're looking to do is determine what types of things do we need to do internally, what types of things do we need to do externally in order to release something that's valuable to the marketplace. So we start by capturing scope. The best way to do this is to have a walkthrough of that laptop or that product with the lens of a persona. So for example, a student may want a very different laptop base and core competencies, storage amount, enhancements, and maintenance than an executive or a gamer. And when you take the time to develop that scope, you can start to break out the pieces, the modules, the components of that laptop underneath each of those higher level pieces of scope. So right now, this is really the way we do this is more of a brainstorming session.
It is, yeah. It feels more like a brainstorming session. We've done this lots of times with clients, and really the idea is to figure out how you can break down the scope. We said decompose scope here, but really it's how can you group scope into smaller pieces of work that teams can work on to produce something that's valuable to the client.
And then we can start to say, okay, if we want to take our product roadmap and take those near-term things and turn them into a release plan, maybe our first release is that we have a pre-configured Nano Pro or Nano Home version that appeals to the student because they're asking for the simplest form of a laptop. Right. So we break that scope down into the pieces that we would need to satisfy the needs of that first near-term customer. Then we might look at that same thing and say, okay, well, how does the business executive's needs differ? How are they more than what the student needs? And so this is where we may make it more lightweight, more battery life, more things to let that person switch from tablet to laptop. And then finally, the gamer needs the most advanced form of our product. And while there's less market, we still want to exploit that. Sure. So maybe next year we'll be modifying the options for our laptop to appeal to that customer. So you'll notice how we didn't have like, you're moving from a roadmap where it's just those three buckets into what we call a release map, which is really taking those buckets and tying them into potential releases and time phasing. So in the next 6 months, we want to release something for the customer that is maybe the student.
Yeah, and this is much more granular. You can see that we're starting to break down those buckets of work into much smaller pieces of work that the teams can actually work on. These are things that the Agile teams could pull into their backlog and work on and still deliver something of value to the customer.
So in this example, maybe battery life is something that I absolutely need a battery to have a minimum viable product and sell that laptop to someone. But maybe the battery for the student is only one that can perform for 3 to 5 hours. And then for the executive, I have 5 to 10 hours, and for the gamer, it's 10 to 15. So that's just a really quick example of what you could expect at those different levels.
And establishing the why with the product vision and strategy. So in this case, as a product owner, I want a product roadmap so that I can communicate the why easily to stakeholders, customers, and my team. So this is a book that Jessica and I have read, and we really like it. We recommend it if you're looking for a more thorough or in-depth discussion about product road mapping. This one is interesting because it looks at the beginning of product roadmaps, kind of that, using the bicycle and then ways, and now what does a product roadmap mean in organizations that are really trying to focus on value, delivering product to their customer. And they have a much more modern way to look at product roadmaps. So we highly recommend it. We took a couple of snapshots and pictures from this book, like this one, which talks about all of the different types of stakeholders. So we talk about customers, stakeholders, and executives. These are basically all of the people that have some sort of a stake in the product that we're developing. And we get a lot of information and feedback from all of the different types of stakeholders that we engage with, so that we understand what is our product supposed to be and what are we trying to deliver.
Right. I think the interesting thing about this diagram is that for customers, we really want to get them excited about the product. We want to get that feedback on the value. Is this providing value to you? The executives, we want them to understand, how the resources are going to be used and potential return on investment.
Right.
We want to provide the strategic context for that direction and the priorities. The sales team, we want them to be ready to have the questions about the product, the direction from a customer, because they have that relationship, the customer and prospective customers in the market. And we really want them to provide feedback on how we're going to make the prospects and the customers want to buy our product and want to maybe in some cases renew.
And we want all of these people to be on the same page. We want to have one vision that shares all of the information that the different people within our organization and our customers, so everybody understands where we're going and they can answer those questions. And us, as if we're thinking of ourselves as the product developers, we need this tool to communicate and to understand how to build a better product.
And Ivy, here's your chart.
Yes.
So when it depends on the market conditions that you have, so some of your products will be, birthed in a dynamic market versus a stable market. So when that market is constantly changing, it's maybe even a growing part of the market, a newer part of the market, then you're going to want to look to the left of the axes. And then you have your more mature product. So it's established. It has a brand. It has a reputation. That's well known in the market versus a young product, brand new ideas.
Right.
So if you have something that's a brand new idea and it's a dynamic and shifting market, then you really want to review the roadmap on a monthly basis. You're going to find that it changes fast enough to really justify the investment of doing it once a month.
I would say in most organizations that I've worked with, especially since I'm, closely tied to the government sector, it's quarterly. For me, in the places that I've worked, the products that I've worked on, I would definitely revisit the product roadmap at least quarterly.
And I think that the S&P 500 companies that are coming up with these cutting edge, competing, in a cutthroat market, they're really reviewing this more monthly. Where I will also say that in a lot of cases, like the nonprofit sector, it's not like there's a lot of competition there for these new ideas
True.
and technologies. So it's more of a maybe more stable environment and much more mature products. So you may find that in each of the sectors, it depends on what sector you're in and what product you're
Sure, and it
developing.
could be services too. So there's a lot of
Absolutely.
factors that are into come into play here, but I think at least quarterly.
Yes,
Yeah.
at least quarterly is our recommendation. So you might be asking yourself, great, I'm excited about a roadmap. I'd like to go create one. It's COVID-19. So you might not have the option to be like Denise and I are and
Stickies on the
collaborating
wall, right?
and doing that type of thing. So we have a couple of tools we'll recommend to you that we use just for everything, really, for training, for working together and in scrumming. So Mural and Miro are two tools that have very different price points and different purposes and uses, but in general, you can get inside of these boards and collaborate with people virtually, and you can see each other, you can watch each other move things around, and you can create sticky notes just like you would on the wall. I highly recommend these. The Mural and the Miro boards really help to enhance the conversation when you're road mapping.
I agree, yeah.
And so finally, we're at the end of our presentation, so I'd love to open it up for more Q&A. I think you've had a chance to really soak in the content and our ideas behind road mapping. There is a QR code here, which if you've never used one before, you just take your phone and use the camera, and it will take you to Agile Crew. Or you can feel free to email me at epicallyagilellc@gmail.com. Denise and I collaborate all the time, so we'd be more than happy to set up a free consultation with both of us to talk about your needs.